Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar that's been organised by the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative, FAIRY. My name is Mika Bourne, and I work on stakeholder engagement with restoration evidence at C4ECRAF, and I'll be your moderator for this event. I will guide our discussion and ensure that we have a productive dialogue on forest biodiversity and ecosystem restoration today. The webinar will be recorded and will be put in English on the CBD website. Today, we celebrate 10 years of Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative support to countries on implementation of restoration targets. This support has been vital through funding catalytic restoration projects, developing tools, and providing technical support through regional workshops. During the webinar, we will showcase some initiatives supported by FAIRY during the last 10 years and seek your views on how FAIRY can best support capacity development, especially in the light of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, if you haven't already, with your name, organisation, and country, so we all know who's online today. To begin, we'll hear some welcoming remarks from Ji-Hun Lee, the Convention on Biological Diversity Secretariat on FAIRY's importance in supporting forest biodiversity and ecosystem restoration targets in the CBD.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates, representatives, and participants, warm welcome to all of you from the CBD Secretariat. We gather here today on the occasion of the UN International Day of Forest to celebrate a decade of commitment and remarkable achievement of the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative, or in short, FAIRY. To commemorate the achievement of the FAIRY, we journey back to the 12th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, convened in Pyeongchang, Korea in 2014. Parties at COP12 underscored the critical need for enhanced collaboration and mutual support in advancing ecosystem restoration. Commencing at this COP12, under the leadership of the Republic of Korea as COP presidency, through the commitment and support of the Korea Forest Service, the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative was developed and welcomed by the parties. implemented through the coordination by the CBD Secretariat. This initiative has played a crucial role in fortifying our collective capacity for ecosystem restoration in line with, at that time, Aichi Biodiversity Target 5, 14, and 15. This initiative now stands as a dedicated collaborative partnership supporting the achievement of the goals and targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework in forest ecosystem, in particular Target 2. In the past decade, the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative has yielded impactful outcomes across 4 pillars of work, namely supporting restoration projects in developing countries, organization of capacity development and technical exchange workshops, creating and expanding partnership and developing knowledge products for forest restoration decision-making, and showcasing outcomes through outreach events and communication materials. Distinguished participants, forests nourish and sustain life on Earth in myriad ways. This year's theme for the International Day of Forest is innovation. This theme highlights the important role that technological advancements could play to support our collective efforts in conserving, restoring, and sustainably utilizing these vital ecosystems. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework sets forth a strategic and ambitious pathway for transformative action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, fostering innovations across ecosystems, including forest. Achieving the goal of restoring 30% of degraded forest ecosystems necessitates the application of innovative technologies while also respecting traditional knowledge. As we reflect on the past and look to the future, our unwavering commitment to protect, restore, and sustainably use these ecosystems remains imperative. Today's discussion will focus on the accomplishment and challenges of forest ecosystem restoration, exploring innovative solutions. I invite all participants to engage actively, share insights, and join us in our collective commitment to the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework in forest ecosystem. And lastly, but not leastly, I thank sincerely to all the speakers and panelists who are sharing their precious time and also expertise with us today. Thank you. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ji-Hoon. Greatly appreciated. Next, we are honored to have Mr. Nam Song-hee, Director General of International Affairs Bureau at the Korea Forest Service. He will provide us with some background on the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative, FAIRI, and its ongoing support and relevance for the Global Biodiversity Framework. Due to time difference, Mr. Hee could not join us live. However, we have a video message from him, and so we will go to watch that now.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Nam Song-hee, Director General of the Korea Forest Service. I would like to express my deep gratitude to the CBD Secretariat and the FAIRI partners for organizing this meaningful webinar celebrating FAIRI's 10th anniversary. Although I am unable to join the webinar, I am truly pleased to give these welcoming remarks. The Korea Forest Service has been supporting the initiative for 10 years since it launched FAIRY at the CBD COP 12 held in Pyeongchang, Korea in 2014. With the CBD Secretariat's hard work and determination, FAIRY has been acknowledged for contributing to one challenge, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and other international initiatives on conserving biodiversity by supporting capacity building in developing countries. Moving forward, FAIRY will be more active, especially in achieving the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework targets adopted at the CBD COP 15 in December 2022. In this light, I hope FAIRY grows and further expands its reach to support more countries. March 21st is the International Day of Forest, and this year's theme is Forest and Innovation. This portrays that scientific technology is crucial for conservation, restoration, and sustainable management of forests. In this context, FAIRY has taken on a leading role as an exemplary technology and science cooperation initiative that influenced the forest biodiversity. The Republic of Korea has successfully restored its land after being devastated by the Korean War. We put great effort into sharing our experience with the international community and addressing global environmental issues. Last year, having celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Forest Rehabilitation Plan, we established the 100-year Forest Vision, which will be carried out through forest policy in 50 years. In addition, we developed the fourth framework plan on forest biodiversity to meet the Kunming-Montreal GBF target domestically. Furthermore, the Korea Forest Service has been closely cooperating with the international organizations to achieve global goals such as biodiversity, climate action, and combating desertification by supporting capacity building for developing countries. The Republic of Korea will stay committed to creating a healthy balance between humanity well-being and protecting nature by conserving, restoring, and sustainably managing forests. Once again, I sincerely congratulate the 10th anniversary of FAIRY and look forward to productive discussions on future pathways to achieve GBF's goals in today's webinar. Thank you. Have a good time.
Thank you. I hope I can speak for all of us in thanking the Korea Forest Service for their generous support, for capacity building efforts, and for their commitment to continuing their support in this crucial time following the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And with those welcoming and opening remarks, I'd now like us to move into our first panel. We will hear highlights of FAIRY's achievements and hear reflections from 3 projects that have received support from FAIRY, such as capacity building workshops and projects testing methodology for assessing priority areas for ecosystem restoration, considering synergies and with other conventions. Please remember for all of the participants to use the Q&A function on the Zoom platform if you have any questions throughout the webinar. The CBD Secretariat team will be managing the Q&A function to answer questions and select some of those questions to be addressed in the plenary towards the end of the webinar. Now, please join me in welcoming Mateus Couto, Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiatives Consultant in the CBD Secretariat. Mateus will take us through the remarkable 10-year journey of the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative, FAIRY, through a short presentation. Mateus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Miki. Hello, everyone. Really an honor to be here speaking on behalf of the Secretariat. So I'll be speaking today about the 10 years of the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative. So the policy context for developing the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative around 10 years ago, we had many countries and subnational governments and private sector making commitments and pledges towards forest conservation, halting deforestation, and ecosystem restoration. That happened in the Bonn Challenge, in SDG 15. Many countries presented pledges in the Paris Agreement, the Global Forest Goals, which is managed by the UN Forum on Forests, and the land degradation neutrality targets in the United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification. And obviously, for the Secretariat, the Aichi biodiversity targets, they were addressing Aichi biodiversity target 5, addressing the rate of loss of natural ecosystem, including forests. And target 15 was addressing the restoration of at least 15% of degraded ecosystems. So this, and noting that the rate of loss of ecosystems was still in a very fast, the parties adopted in COP12 in the Republic of Korea in 2014, the decision 1219 on ecosystem conservation and restoration. In this decision, parties reaffirmed the need to enhance support and cooperation to promote ecosystem restoration efforts of developing countries, noting that not enough progress has been made to reduce habitat loss and to promote ecosystem restoration. So FAIRY was conceived as a mechanism to support parties in developing and operationalizing national targets and plans for ecosystem conservation and restoration within the framework of the Aichi biodiversity target. So the main activities and outcomes for the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative are these. So in activities, we've organized regional workshops and supported the development of knowledge products, aiming to raise the capacity for the countries to undertake restoration. We've also provided direct support to projects so the parties could enhance their implementation of restoration action. And we've also conducted outreach activities to profile restoration actions and to raise awareness about it, and also provided educational opportunities for everyone. And the results before 2020, we've noted an increase in the understanding of how to develop a restoration target that is smart, meaning that the targets should be specific, measurable, action-oriented, and time-bound. And through the activities of FAIRY, we've noted an improvement in the restoration targets that were presented to the Secretariat. We've contributed to the knowledge base and awareness of the benefits of restoration and supported the efficient and ecologically sound implementation of ecosystem restoration. So throughout the 10 years, we've organized 7 regional workshops, and the regional workshops were addressing specific issues on ecosystem restoration and forest conservation within the regions and subregions. So there were workshops in Ghana, in Thailand, in Colombia, South Africa, Morocco, and Fiji, and St. Lucia, which covered the Caribbean subregion. And also we've organized 2 global workshops, one in 2021 in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, and just last year in Italy, we've organized another global workshop. So the support to country projects, we're able to support 12 small-scale but strategic and catalytic projects on the ground. And I invite you all to read the publication in FAIRY website to learn more about each of these projects. So we had projects in Mexico, Guatemala, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Uruguay, Niger, and Burkina Faso, Lebanon, Kenya, Madagascar, Bhutan, and Cambodia. Through FAIRY, we've also supported publications, tools, and training opportunities. The publications are all available in the FAIRY website, but we have publications covering the potential of natural regeneration, an assessment of Aichi Biodiversity Targets 5 and 15, and also a companion to the short-term action plan on ecosystem restoration. The tools we have supported are the Wheatland Forest, developed by iSeed, organization based in Australia, which was named before as IIS Australia, and the UN Biodiversity Lab, which provides plenty of biodiversity layers and spatial information for everyone to access. And currently we are working with the Food and Agriculture Organization on the framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring, the FERM. And through the training opportunities, we've provided opportunities for more than 3,000 people, especially through the massive open online course, which was open, and we had participants from more than 170 countries. And this MOOC, this massive online course, was transformed into a self-paced module. So anyone can access this module anytime and do the training in the pace that they desire. So in this year and next year, in 2024 and 25, our main goal is to support the parties to develop specific and ambitious ecosystem restoration targets, together with detailed implementation, funding, and monitoring plans. And the sum of the efforts of national level is sufficient to put the world on course to achieving the 2030 mission and 2050 vision for biodiversity. So our main areas of activities for the next 2 years, we are supporting the roadmap for Target 2 on ecosystem restoration. And this is done in the context of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and to the many partners that are supporting this work. We're also working with FAO, SCR, C4, and the UN Decade partners on the resource guide to Target 2 to launch at COP16 this year in October. We are also supporting the development of the Ecosystem Restoration Gap Report with partners to stock take and adjust the level of ambitions regarding the ecosystem restoration targets. We will be organizing regional and global workshops and conduct outreach activities through side events, to webinars, partnerships, and social media. So I invite you all to follow FAIRY and continue to be in touch through the FAIRY website. Thank you, Mike. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mateus, for this great overview of the activities that have been conducted by FAIRY. It's really wonderful to see how much has been achieved, and we could see from your presentation that the main pillars of FAIRY's support is development of tools, capacity, and partnership building. Now we would like to move on to highlight 3 cases. And in a moment, we'll see a slide where we have Magda, Adams, and Deshni, and you can see their roles and positions. And I'd like to invite all 3 of them to put their videos on so that we can move on to the panel discussion and presentation. First of all, I'd like to highlight one of the projects that's been supported by FAIRY, which was in Lebanon's Mediterranean forests. There, it aimed to understand the role of wildlife in the success of ecosystem restoration projects. The project utilized innovative methods, and I'm just trying to see if, there we are. Innovative methods such as analyzing DNA samples collected from nature to understand animal-plant interactions to improve the selection of plant species for restoration projects. Magda Kara, Principal Scientist at the Mediterranean Facility of the European Forest Institute, welcome. Could you please share some of the achievements in Lebanon and how these findings could inspire restoration projects in other parts of your country and maybe other countries in similar conditions, with similar conditions? Over to you.
Thank you, Mikey. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to share my experience with you. And first of all, happy International Forest Day. And we are grateful for the support of FERI for this initiative. In fact, I'm very happy to share this work, especially because it's really supported something keen to support a need on the ground. In fact, we are working on forest restoration in Lebanon since 2008. We were planting cedars and pine and this kind of stuff. And then at some point, we were considering the sustainability of the forest over a long time. And when considering natural regeneration, while some plants are dispersed by wind, some of the plants needs animals and wildlife to disperse the seed and self-sustain the forest for a long time period. And this is when we question, are these animals still alive or still roaming in our mountains, or we should restart planting those trees again? So going from this question, we went back to the lab and we wanted to find a technique to respond to this question. And this is when we seek the support of FERI, and the fund and the support you showed for us was really very important because we were able to reply to this question. So we collected scats animals from the field to see what they are feeding on and what seeds they are dispersing. And from this, now we have more information to know what to plant in order to sustain this wildlife so they can accomplish their role all over the years. And what we found is not only important for Lebanon, for Lebanese forest, but for the Eastern Mediterranean countries with whom we share the same tree species and the same animals. But also the technique we developed is also to be used anywhere. I mean, this is not very specific to the region because this food complex is very important and should be the basis for any forest ecosystem restoration project. And today, like I moved from St. Joseph University in Beirut, and I'm working in Barcelona with CFI, and we are trying to develop this all over the Mediterranean.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Magda. We're going to come back with another question, but I would like to move on and address the next question to Adams. In March 2020, FERI organized a sub-regional exchange workshop for the Caribbean on the restoration of forests and other ecosystems in the Castries, St. Lucia. The objective of the workshop was to support parties in planning and carrying out national plans on ecosystem restoration, guided by the short-term action plan on ecosystem restoration. Adams Toussaint was the representative of the St. Lucia, which hosted the workshop. So I'd like to ask you, can you tell us about how the workshop helped St. Lucia influence restoration plans and policies in your country and formulate more ambitious restoration targets?
Thank you, Mickey. Good morning, everybody. I must also echo happy UN International Forest Day. And also, we should not forget that this decade is dedicated to ecosystem restoration as well. So it is really fitting that today we recognizing the role of restoration and the role of FERI in terms of contributing to the global target for restoration of 40% of degraded areas. The workshop in St. Lucia was very timely and was welcomed very much by St. Lucia, and on behalf of the people of St. Lucia, I wish to say thank you for the Korean government and the CBD for the effort and the support provided for this training workshop. And I should echo the same for small island developing states, especially those within the Caribbean. St. Lucia is a small island developing state, and clearly our ecosystem is very important for the services that we depend on that underpins the economic development of St. Lucia and the sustainable development of small and developing states, especially, excuse me, sorry, especially, sorry about that, my cell phone.
No problem, no problem.
I swear, but I should turn it off completely. Yes, especially the fact that any kind of impact on the ecosystem will be felt and have dire and severe consequences. In light of climate change, the impact of climate change, we have seen how degraded ecosystem can exacerbate the impact of climate change. Oh, goodness, sorry about that. What bad timing. Sorry, my God. I just need to turn off this phone completely. Okay, so I should turn it off. All right. My sincere apologies.
No
This is,
problem. Please continue.
technology and innovation cause the big praise of technology sometimes. Yeah, so the workshop was timely for plans, especially in terms of policies as well. We adopted our national forest policy to include an ecosystem-based approach to forest management. Forest management in the past was really focused on timber production, which did not make an impact for small island developing states. But other ecosystem services were more important, and managing the forest strictly for ecosystem services, especially with regards to the assessment of forests and the amount of timber, the volume of timber, etc. This was what the policy for forests and forest management policy was based on. Now, after the workshop, we have actually adopted new forest policies and forest management techniques, etc., to really look at the ecosystem-based approach, looking at all factors of biodiversity and recognizing that pristine ecosystem, forest ecosystems, are really the answer to the question of combating and building resilience to climate change. We are in the path of hurricanes, and in recent time, we've experienced severe impact of climate change in terms of mass wastage of soil, forests, ecosystems, etc., the degradation of mangroves, etc. So these brought into the forefront how we restore our ecosystems after this. Contributing to that is the whole question of the fragmentation of ecosystems by human beings in terms of agriculture and competing uses and all of these drivers of biodiversity loss. So the restoration took many different facets, especially assisted natural regeneration that came out from the whole question of the workshop. And today, in commemoration of UN International Day of Forests, a number of civil society organizations, government organizations, and the people in the southern end of St. Lucia are now restoring the really degraded section of the mangrove, the Makote mangrove, which is a Ramsar site, where you have some dieback, significant dieback of at least more than 10 hectares of areas of dieback. And the technique used is assisted natural regeneration, looking at and also using a slew of innovation to determine what is the cause of the dieback, because we still have lack of information with regards to the dieback. But we are actually using what we call wildlings and seedlings from in the area and try to mimic the forest structure and composition which existed in the past. So in a nutshell, I would say that the training and the assistance provided was really timely, and we are looking forward to more support from the international organizations like the UNCBD and other government agencies to provide further support to small island developing states like St. Lucia.
Thank you so much, Adams. And it's really nice to hear how these capacity building workshops can lead on to action and change on the ground. So really fantastic. And just a reminder to all our participants online, I can see that questions are coming through, but please continue to post them in the Q&A function, and we will come to them. We have a whole section at the end of the webinar dedicated to those questions, so we will come through to them. Now, moving on to our next panelist, we have Deshni Pillai, the Portfolio Manager of Nature, Climate and Energy at the United Nations Development Programme in South Africa. Welcome. In 2023, UNDP received support from FERI to conduct pilot projects in 5 countries, including South Africa, to test alignment in geospatial information on land degradation and terrestrial ecosystem degradation. This project utilized an innovative method developed by UNDP for prioritizing areas for conservation and restoration, the Essential Life Support Areas method. In South Africa, participants of the national consultation process provided numerous nationally produced biodiversity and ecosystem layers, replacing the default global datasets, to improve the outcome of modeling processes. As part of South Africa's ongoing effort to implement restoration policies, the project supported the organization of a national consultation to discuss available data sources on degradation, habitat distribution, and potential benefits to produce a restoration priority map. So my question to you, Deshni, is South Africa has a strong expertise in restoration ecology. What were the key outcomes of the project, and how has it helped to support NBSAPs? So for those that are not keen on all the acronyms, National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans development in your country.
Sure.
Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, firstly, to FERI for inviting me to speak, and then also happy International Forest Day, and you celebrating that together with our Human Rights Day in South Africa. So indeed, a very important day for us globally and nationally. So UNDP, of course, has supported several projects in South Africa, and as you mentioned already, the essential life support areas. And due to the rich and long history of biodiversity conservation planning, and South Africa actually customized the ALSA process to, so our map was initially, is called the Essential Life Support Action Areas for South Africa, really looking at areas that need prioritization for immediate action. So the ALSA process laid the foundation for, of course, this project, Mapping Restoration Priority Action Areas for South Africa. And of course, we use a similar methodology, and all of the data sets that came together were put together to support the ALSA process. And through our long history of conservation planning and prioritization, we already have quite a strong community of practice with very with strong technical support from our practitioners. This, of course, placed an emphasis on developing important planning principles and on, of course, the knowledge products. Our products go through quite a rigorous peer review mechanism, and this is hosted by the South African National Biodiversity Institute, which leads the biodiversity planning in South Africa. So the recently completed restoration dossier, which undertook a prioritization analysis of multiple restoration actions in a variety of degraded landscapes. Of course, this map of restoration priorities for South Africa was developed using our systematic conservation planning techniques, and we went out to identify the 30% of degraded land in the country, and which would benefit most from our restoration action. The degraded area canvas was constructed by combining, of course, national scale mapping, mapping our data sets that represented the key sources or manifestations of degradation. And the areas that we looked at was alien and invasive plant species, degraded freshwater ecosystems, including important ecological infrastructure like wetlands. We also used large-scale soil erosion and bush encroachment data. The optimization, of course, was driven through delineated areas of importance in South Africa that ranged from ecological service delivery to biodiversity to ecosystem conservation, and then, of course, to climate change resilient. The resulting map was then subsequently overlaid by the various degradation layers to enable implementers to determine the types of restoration efforts and action required in each planning unit. Of course, the intention of this analysis is to incorporate into South Africa's Global Biodiversity Framework Implementation Plan, specifically contributing to the strategic planning for the implementation of Target 2. And we've taken all of this information and we've shared it with the our national department and the focal point that is leading on Target 2 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So I can just pause here if there's our map. And yeah, thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much, Deshni, and we'll come back with a follow-up question. I just wanted to come back to each of the panelists now with a follow-up question. And if we have some time, we'll pick one of them from the participants. Otherwise, the rest we'll take to the end. So first for Magda, what are the key challenges facing Mediterranean forest biodiversity today? And which of these should restoration projects prioritize in addressing?
Very challenging question. In fact, the Mediterranean, as you may know, is a hotspot for biodiversity. And it's also a hotspot for human civilization. And a lot of things are happening in the Mediterranean. Political insecurity, a lot of things happening. So very often, the biodiversity conservation is pushed back to a second layer of importance because we have a human crisis. But these crises are intimately linked to our environmental condition. So we should really tackle them in the same emergency, if I may say. For the forest, in fact, this region of the world, especially now under climate change, is holding a lot of important resources for our future forests. You know, during the last glacial age, this is where we have some forest refuge where genetic resources are very important in here. And they constitute the future of our forests, the ones that will be very important for Europe, for example. So if we don't conserve them, preserve them in situ and ex situ today, we may lose forever these genetic resources, very important genetic resources. So we have to restore what we degraded, but we have also to preserve what's already still existing. And it's very urgent because climate change is impacting very hard on the Mediterranean. So I would say this should be a priority, and the people that working in the forest and around the forest should be aware about this emergency, and we should tackle it really very seriously.
Thank you. My next question is for Adams. You mentioned about the unique challenges of small island developing states. What are some special needs and challenges in these particular contexts when it comes to ecosystem restoration, including forests?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a really good question. I mean, I've been a forester for over 40-something years now, and I've really studied the impact of climate change on forests. And we have been in a battle to try and develop the capacity for our forests to adapt to climate change. And that has been a challenge. I mean, since St. Lucia had experienced a hurricane in 40 years, that was Hurricane Allen. And following Hurricane Island, we have had 6 major hurricanes that has been through the island. And that has seriously changed the composition and structure of forests and other ecosystems, I must say. For example, there's some forested area, rainforested area, where before the advent of hurricanes, you had a rich diversity of species occurring in these forests. Now we have a predominance of one particular type of forest, which is which is dominating 30% of forests when we conduct inventory and assessment of species composition. So clearly you could see the structure and composition. There's some species that we've realized because of human impact on them, for example, tapping and illicit felling and removal for different uses. And if this is not managed carefully, we realize the stage for when it reaches maturity is really reducing. So the basal area, the diameter of these have significantly reduced from prior to 1980. We had, say for example, the species which are tapped for frankincense used to be about 40 centimeters diameter. Now we have the average diameter size as 20 centimeters diameter, meaning that some of these species may not reach steady state or to be able to achieve the stage where they can get into maturity to produce seeds and replenish themselves. So if we have the frequent and more constant hurricanes, we will have serious problems and perhaps the loss of species on islands. So the impact of climate change is felt on islands, and you have the stage where you have most islands in the Caribbean are volcanic, steep islands and sloping. So it's really impacting the coast as well in terms of biodiversity in the coast, coral reefs, seagrass bed, etc., because of the huge sediment load where you have mass wastage of land, of soil washing into rivers, into the coral reef. Not only you have this soil loss and soil biodiversity loss, but you also have loss of biomass and a significant amount of species over a period of time. Added to that, you have the question of invasive alien species that are attacking and dominated. Some areas, especially the coastal dry forests, are prone to fires and fighting fires. So basically, this is a really challenge. And the challenge now is for these economies, this government and other agencies to really find the resources to be able to determine, prioritize feeding, school, providing health, etc., and help in terms of restoring these ecosystems. So clearly, the means of implementing a lot of the plans for restoration of ecosystems really we definitely need a lot of assistance in that regard because of the impact of climate change in alien invasive species, fires, and plus you have fragmentation because of competing land use, because we have limited space for development and for people to live, etc. So you find that land use planning is at a premium. And I think too is that the government have recognized the importance of this, the importance of ecosystems, the importance of ecosystem for combating climate change, building resilience. But with a small economy and being so vulnerable, it makes it really difficult for small and developing states to really respond to the impact of climate change, the loss of biodiversity, the fragmentation, and meeting the targets that is set. So, but the interest is there, the drive is there, the motivation is there. I think we definitely need more support from the international agencies for the work that we have planned to undertake to be able to meet our targets.
Thank you, Adams, for pointing out some of these needs and some of the need for investment and the relationship also between forests and oceans and the interconnected way that drivers and degradation are linked. I have a question now for Deshni. if you could just share a little bit of insight. We've heard a lot about the ferry program and the support, but if you could share some insight on the outcomes of your interaction with the CBD and the UNCCD focal points.
Okay, excellent. But before I go there, I just wanted to add to Adam's reflection. I think it's the only reason South Africa is able to have the data sets that they do is exactly because of this international investments in national data sets. And that even you'd be able to see, we were able to quickly mobilize that data in order to develop products for land use and decision making. So really that call for support at a national level, it feeds multiple outcomes, reporting into to international MEAs, national level environmental and land use decision making at a strategic level. So really, that's how we've managed to bring all of that information together to feed into the other multilateral environmental agreements. So in South Africa, of course, we have a multilateral environmental programs forum. So all of the MEAs come together at a national level, and they feed into, so we start looking at how we can combine the information, the data sets that we need, that we can provide one coherent set of data. And of course, the fundamental data set that we use is data coming out of our national biodiversity assessment, which feeds into our national state of environment report, that also feeds into, like I mentioned, the international reporting. But all of this would not have happened if we don't have that investment in looking at national level data. So there's quite a lot of global data sets, but having we cannot underestimate the importance of really looking at taking that to national level, and exactly for the reasons we've been sharing this afternoon. And so in South Africa, we have shared all of this information with our UNCCD focal point. We've also shared the information with, at a national level, we have a working group developing the implementation plan for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And what we've also managed to do at a national level is align our two big national policies. So we've got an updated white paper on the conservation of biodiversity. And so we've managed to bring that into the implementation plan for the Global Biodiversity Framework. So all of these products, all of these knowledge products have really fed into that system. So I can maybe pause here. I hope I covered your question adequately, Mika.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm always happy when you build on another point, because there's often these common themes. Just before we finish this panel, I just wanted to, Magda, if you're still there was just one other question that came from the participants that I was hoping to share with you. So Magda, if you put your video on, if you're available, otherwise we'll come back to it later. You're there, great. So there was one question from one of the participants around sustainability. So they were asking how the sustainability of the project will take place when the project finishes, because we all know the challenges with project activities and sustainability. So if you could just give some reflections on that.
Yeah, in fact, this is when our works may need all the investment on including the society in what we are doing, because whatever we are doing and all these technological means we are using are very important, but they shouldn't be only with the people who are doing the job and leaving. So this is why we should really including the local community in whatever we do, but especially building capacity of people, of researchers, of conservationists in each country to make use of this technology. And this is where the collaboration between country and capacity building at regional level are very important, because we are using the same resources and we can exchange experience dealing with the same ecosystems, etc. So this loop is very important, again, I would say. Yeah, so including local stakeholders in whatever we do from start until the end, and make them so how we say it in English, I mean the people who will take from us the work and lead it to the end. Thank you. Sorry.
Great, thank you so much. I think that's a really wonderful reflection. So thank you so much to our three cases, the three panelists. We'll come back to you at the end with some more questions. So with that, we move on to our second panel discussion, in which we will delve into the pressing challenges related to forest biodiversity and the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. This discussion is crucial as it emphasizes the necessity of enhancing collaboration among UN agencies, international and regional organizations, Indigenous peoples and local communities, and funding initiatives. In this panel, we'll explore the importance of forest ecosystem to meet goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework and opportunities to support countries. We will also highlight key developments related to forest and ecosystem restoration, along with synergies with the Rio Conventions and regional multilateral efforts. Please remember to continue posting your questions in the Q&A function. We will come to these at the end of this panel. And in this panel, we'd like to hear your ideas and recommendations for the future of FAIRI and how FAIRI can best support the Global Biodiversity Framework implementation. We will address them also in the guided discussion at the end. Now it's time to hear from Jamal Anglachova from the CBD Secretariat. Jamal will provide us with a comprehensive explanation of the role of forests in meeting the framework's targets. Jamal, over to you.
Thank you so much, Miki. So I'm Jamal Anglachova, Forest Biodiversity Officer at the CBD Secretariat, and my role now is to start the second panel with an overview. I'm not sure how comprehensive it will be, considering the short format of our webinar, of presenting you the linkages between the forest biodiversity and the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and highlighting on the one hand, the opportunities which the GBF brings now for conservation and sustainable management of forests, but at the same time, how important is achieving the conservation of forests for the success of the GBF goals and targets. So if I could have the presentation now on the screen. And to do that, of course, I would like just to take a very quick overview of where we have actually left the forest biodiversity in the last decade, when the strategic plan for biodiversity was completed in 2022. So the next slide, please. Right, so as you already heard, there were specifically two targets of the Aichi biodiversity targets where the forest was nested. The one is an Aichi biodiversity target 5, which was talking about the reducing the loss of the habitats, including forests, but also reducing the fragmentation. And it was supported by Aichi biodiversity target 15, which was calling for restoration of 15% of degraded ecosystems. Based on the report of the CBD parties, those two targets have not been fully achieved. But nevertheless, based on the global monitoring findings of other processes, we could see also some picture. And although the picture is a bit diverse in terms of where we were standing in terms of their forest conservation. So we saw that the rate of deforestation was declining, although it was a different declining rate in different regions. But nevertheless, we were still continuing losing 10 million hectares of forest every year during the second half of the past decade. And among from what we have lost, the 47 million were the primary forests, so which were actually lost during the last 20 years. The process which was happening right in parallel is that area of planted forest was increasing, and among them is also the area of high intensity and managed plantation forest. We're also witnessing the detrimental impact of the climate change, and we see the human-induced and the climate change-induced forest fires were increasing, and almost 30% of tree cover loss globally was due to the forest fires, and majority of that forest fires was happening in the boreal forest. So based on that results and on the one hand, success which we have in the forest conservation, but also seeing the current and emerging trends. The Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 has suggested among some of the transitions for the next decade is the land and forest transition, which would be have the key elements of conservation and restoration of natural habitats. Of course, it is very important to do it through the landscape level spatial planning. And of course, it was highlighting the importance of the ecosystem services for the livelihoods for local communities. So the Global Biodiversity Framework, Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, was adopted in December 2022. And if we can go to the next slide. We know that the forest is not explicitly mentioned, is not mentioned in any of the target of the GBF, but at the same time, it pushes us really to look across all the targets, finding how relevant are those targets for the forest, and vice versa, how important is the contribution of forests to the achievement of those targets. So, and I will take a very quick overview for the three segments of the targets of the GBF, and the first one is on the reducing threats for biodiversity. And here I would like to highlight only a few targets. So it's really just for the format of the our webinar. I'm presenting only a few targets. There are much more targets here which are relevant to forest. But I would like to just to mention the target 1 on the spatial planning. We already heard from the previous speakers how important is the spatial planning for the forest conservation. And since the target 1 of the GBF is also has a very strong call on reducing the fragmentation and connecting habitats, and reducing the loss of high integrity ecosystems. So this is a target which has a high relevance for the forest, as we're already losing a lot of primary forest. So, and also the role of the forest as to connect the fragmented habitats is also very great. So the target 2 of the GBF, which is calling to restore at least 30% of degraded ecosystem, is also highly relevant for forest, as the forest has almost 1.5 billion hectares of forest landscape restoration potential, which offers also a multiple benefit. It is important to consider all the lessons which we have learned from the past decade, the failure in the forest restoration, but also the success on the forest restoration. I would like to highlight the importance of the target 5 of the GBF on sustainable, safe, and legal harvesting and trade of wild species. We know from the global reports that up to 40% of global timber trade comes from illegal sources. And the increasing demand for wood could trigger the increase of that number. So we really need to work to ensure, together with the government, together with the business, that this number is being reduced, and the timber demand is happening, increase of the timber demand is happening sustainably. Another aspect of this target, which is very important, is securing the wildlife of the forest. Because we also heard from the speaker from Lebanon how it is important, the wildlife of a forest for forest resilience. So we know that now the empty or silent forest, this is a result of human activities where we really, even in the restoration activities, where we emphasize the trees over the wild species of the forest. But the forest is not just the trees, it is all the living organisms in the forest. So the target 8 is also highly important for forest biodiversity. This target is calling to minimize impact of the climate change of biodiversity, also building the resilient ecosystems. So we know that the forest is a very powerful nature-based solution. We also know that the forest which are rich in their biodiversity, they're much more resilient to biodiversity for climate change impact. So we heard also from the previous speaker in St. Lucia and also in Lebanon, this detrimental impact of the climate change. And we know that the research is also now building up the study showing the long-term impact of the climate change on the forest composition and the structure. So this is one of the areas which really requires an urgent attention. But another part of that target is also talking about the minimizing impact of climate action. And here, as we know, that there is an increasing global carbon market. So we really need to make sure that this increasing global carbon market is providing a positive impact on the forest biodiversity, and we work through the compliance mechanism to minimize the potential negative impact of the global carbon market, which is largely based on the forest. So if we can go to the next slide, where I briefly brings you through the second segment of the global biodiversity targets, which are aiming to meet the people's needs. So in here, of course, we have a very important target 10 on sustainable agriculture, including forestry. So we really need to work together, and we're working here with many partners to ensure that the forests are managed sustainably through the biodiversity-friendly practices. So we know that there are many techniques through which the forest could be managed, bringing or mimicking, making it closer to nature, and making the resilient forest, even in the productive landscapes. The target 11, which is, I would say, the twin target of the ecosystem restoration, is really looking at the forest ecosystem services and function. And forest provides a myriad of ecosystem services and functions. I would only highlight here that a healthy standing forest with its wildlife is also providing a very strong buffer for reducing the contact with the pathogens, because this target is also calling for the health action. So the target 12 is an urban green and blue spaces and to enhance the human well-being. That's the target where it calls for increased attention to the urban forest. And I think all of us, especially during the COVID time, we have really realized how important is the role of the urban forest. The urban forest is also playing a very strong role in regulating the services like cleaning the air, reducing the heat waves, but also the mental health. Urban forest is also great in connecting fragmented habitats too. Fragmentation caused by urban and peri-urban settlements. So, and the final group of targets of the GBF, where we see a strong connection with the forest, and maybe that's where I group them together. So it's target 15, 16, and 18 on sustainable business, consumption, and incentives. So this is a group of the target which actually looks into the many root causes of deforestation. So we really need to work closely here with the business and government to ensure that there are more companies which disclose their risk and impact on biodiversity along the whole value chain. We know that the businesses and companies already starting to report, but still there was less than 10% of the business companies based on the recent assessment, which actually assess the impact along the whole value chain. Also, the consumption choice, the consumer choice is a very important for reducing the risk and removing deforestation from the whole supply chain. And also the role of the government is very important in providing the positive incentives and also reducing the negative incentives. And the final targets, so on the role of indigenous peoples and local communities, secure land tenure and livelihood is highly relevant for forest biodiversity, because we know that almost 40% of the forest are the intact forest are in the land in the indigenous lands. At the same time, we also know from the studies that in those indigenous lands where the tenure is secured, the rate of deforestation is much lower. So right now, the CBD parties are working on establishing the new program of work on Article 8J, and one of the activities which will be mentioned in this Article 8J is a action area on the restoration. So we're really looking forward to this new opportunity to work with the indigenous people and local communities on the forest conservation. So, and to conclude my presentation, I would like just to mention once again that, as you have seen, since the forest is not really specifically attached to a one single target, in fact, it gives us the opportunity to look and see almost 330-degree panoramic view on where the forest biodiversity and the global biodiversity targets. Among the ongoing initiatives, I just would like to briefly mention, and you see that on the screen, that CBD Secretariat, we're part of the Collaborative Partnership on Forest, and jointly with the 16 members of the CPF, we have developed and launched the joint call to action on forest towards 2030, which is calling to reduce and revert the loss of forest. We are actively participating in the activities of UN Forum on Forest. We have recently concluded the joint initiative agreement with the UNFF Secretariat, and we'll be working jointly with them to implement it. Of course, we are appreciating a huge support from FAO, Forestry Division. We have recently renewed MOU with the International Tropical Timber Organization. We're working also with our Rio Convention partners, and like I'm sure that many of you who participate in the forest events and the climate negotiations, you know that the last global stocktake took a very strong decision, which also emphasized the role of forests and importance of halting and reversing deforestation and forest degradation by 2030. The role of the regional entities is also very important. The CBD Secretariat has the program of work on forest biodiversity, which was developed in 2006. And I invite everyone to follow up on the substance negotiations, which are taking place in May this year, where the programs of work will be on the agenda. So, and finally, we really need to have a guidance from the parties and support from the partners to see how these fragmented targets would come into one nice picture and a comprehensive overview of the global biodiversity framework. So I will stop here, Miki. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jamal, and thank you for showing all of those interlinkages and for highlighting that even though forest ecosystems are not explicitly mentioned in the framework, the forests are an integral part of terrestrial ecosystems. So now I'd like to invite the three speakers for the panel to have their cameras on, and we have a slide coming up so that you can see all three speakers, their titles and roles. And so I invite you to keep your videos on as we move into the speakers. So next we have the honor of welcoming Kamal Kumar Rai, who's a researcher on Indigenous science and philosophy from Nepal, who will speak about their contribution to forest biodiversity goals and targets. Kamal, in the context of your country, Nepal, what roles do Indigenous peoples and local community-led initiatives, what roles can they play in implementing the forest and restoration agenda? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Because of this, my internet weak, maybe I can close the video.
No problem.
On the behalf of IPLC, we are very pleased to wish and express our gratitudes and happiness on the occasion of the 10 years forest ecosystem restoration and International Day of Forest. I also like to thank the CBD Secretariat to this opportunity to be here. And I want to present some of our initiative in national level. We are working in voluntary basis. The initiatives is namely in biocultural restorations in landscape approach in the Mundum region. Mundum itself is the cosmological for the indigenous peoples and local community. So it is the IPLC initiative to revive, strengthen, and promote the indigenous forest species in the degraded lands, sacred sites, riverbanks, in a farmland, and in surrounding in a water sources. This initiative is based on the traditional knowledge, innovation, and practices close to the GBF targets is the Article 8J, because the indigenous peoples, women, youth, and elders from IPLC has more knowledge on the forest because of their traditional knowledge. So we are promoting with this initiative in the region for the forest ecosystem restoration and for the biodiversity conservation in a participatory manners. Furthermore, we are also lobbying to recognize the IPLC initiatives in NBSAP revision and the process to implement KNGVF and its targets to achieve harmony with the Mother Nature in long term and build the capacity for IPLC women, girls, and youth from the IPLC. That's our national levels, we're working as a voluntary basis. We are looking very keenly to inclusion in our NBSAP revision, then we can work in together to achieve. For IPLC, the forest is a sacred. The IPLC leaders, religious peoples, can speak with the tree, share their shallowness, happiness, and willingness to communicate in indigenous language. It means the indigenous language is very important, is a fundamental for traditional knowledge. To understand each other and speak and sharing with the Mother Natures. The IPLC, women and elders, is very keen to play very important role for this the knowledge system and practices. Taking is very important to taking account in especially for NBSAP revision for equality and inclusiveness for making the NBSAP and more things. And the priority as a indigenous peoples and local communities are the custodian and right holders in CBD. Therefore, we are also looking for our full and effective participation and pre-prior informed consent in the ecosystem restoration in our land and territories. The mechanism and procedures, the equality and inclusive for the forest sectors is very important for the restoration and for program planning. Is need to be very clearly to reflect in NBSAP to implement game GBF goals and targets. That is our recommendation to look forwards. For this movement, we are for supporting for the NBSAP revision in more inclusive, but it seems to be very difficult to our engagement in the process. So this is my slide from our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kamal. And there's been a lot of questions also coming from participants relating to the role of Indigenous and local communities. So I think we'll also come back to you in a few moments. Now I would like to just highlight that during the Climate COP28 in Dubai last year, Brazil announced the Tropical Forest Forever Fund, aiming at raising additional funds to conserve and restore the world's tropical forests. While the fund is still in the design phase, the goal is to support approximately 80 tropical forest countries in achieving deforestation target and restoring forests. We have Garo Badmanian with us today, Director General of the Brazilian Forest Service. Garo, could you please share the ideas which inspired the creation of the fund and what is unique about it?
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jamal, for the presentation. I want to, first of all, thank my friends and colleagues at the CBD. This is a great opportunity to speak about the topic because although it was presented during the UNFCCC COP28, this is not a carbon mechanism. It's a mechanism that we hope addresses all three of the Rio Conventions, if not others. Definitely contributes to several of the targets that Jamal presented of the Kunming-Montreal. So we are very happy with that. And I always like to present something with our friends on CBD. So personally, I'm also very pleased for that. The fund, the reason we do this, if you look at back, we always keep saying we don't have enough money. And when we have the money we have, all the countries have on forests, usually come for projects. Is a GEF project, a Green Climate Fund project, a bilateral deal like we have in the Amazon Fund for Brazil, Indonesia has one for Indonesia, so on and so forth. Those are important to upgrade our work. But we always had that question of the countries that, let's say, have done their homework. Deforestation has decreased. Forests is under control. But how to maintain the forest under control, how to continue to support the IPLC there once deforestation decreases. So it's an issue only of that we more want to stock, decreasing the problem, but not necessarily we have funds out there for maintaining the forest once the problem has been addressed. You see, this happens in every country and happened in this country. We decreased deforestation at record highs during the beginning of the 2000 decade. Then we decrease the amount of work doing to maintain that forest, and then deforestation start creeping in again because it's a permanent action. So we need to think about a permanent fund, and that's what we call it, forest forever. So what are we thinking? What we suggest, and this is a concept that we expect academia, IPLCs, and other governments to help us to flesh it out, is to create an equivalent of an endowment fund. You know, universities, pension funds, all of them work in sort of a fund where you receive some investment, you receive some initial investors, and use this to build capital, and the revenue is what you share with the investors. In this case, the investors will be those that have forests. So we are proposing two sets of criteria. One criteria is eligibility criteria. We know there are 80 different countries, around 80 that have for tropical forests. We are suggesting a set of eligibility criteria. The country has already, this has to be performance-based. This is not for the future. This is to reward those that are already doing a good job, those that already have low deforestation rate. They have already a trend of decreasing deforestation. They also have a transparent monitoring system for deforestation that the society can see, everybody can see. Also, very importantly, we are suggesting that the countries have a mechanism on how they intend to use the fund internally, living in the forest that are doing the protection, the conservation, or investing to them. We don't want to have, and we're saying you should have this mechanism that should be clear so that you can have social control. But because we're dealing with 80 different countries, we cannot think that there's going to be a one-size-fits-all. Countries are in different stages of the development. Countries are in different stages of economic and social needs. Therefore, they may use monies differently, but we want them to say, this is how we intend to use the money. First, you have to have already your performance at a certain level. So GEF and others continue to support the countries to upgrade their performance. Once you upgrade that performance, you'll receive a fixed amount per hectare of forest. That also important based on what we discussed, what we saw earlier, is that we are saying forest or forest under restoration. So we are trying to say forest under restoration also is increased for biodiversity purposes. So this is important for environmental services, ecosystem services, biodiversity, so on and so forth. Therefore, we want that to be considered as when you're being rewarded for its number of hectares. And you have a penalty for areas that you clear cut, but also degraded forest. That again has a reflection on biodiversity, because sometimes, as we know, empty forest, degraded forest, they may look in the satellite like as a forest, but it doesn't have as much value. So that should be discounted as well. Once we have that, what we are saying that we can go to different places, and I need to wrap it up, is that we know there are over 13 trillion dollars. That's 1 million billion, 1,000 billion of funds. They are sitting now in sovereign wealth funds. And sovereign wealth funds, by design, have to invest part of their money in low rate, low risk investment. So what we are saying that we're going to want to have a multilateral agency, possibly a multilateral agency. They create a fund, and instead of, let's say, a country A has $200 billion on low rate funds from source A, take part of that fund, start investing in our new fund, the Forest Forever Fund. Same amount of money, same rate, let's say 3.5% per year over the next 20 years. That's the bond they will buy. The new fund takes the money, invests in the market in ESG type activities, and the difference, let's say you get 8% a year on average, you have to make the reserve for 3.5%, you keep the other 4.5% to distribute per hectare of forest of the countries that meet the eligibility criteria. That way, the fund continues to run, you don't use the capital, and you just live on the yields of it. That's basically the overall idea, and for the time that I have, I think it's enough for people entertaining what their appetite and start asking questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gara, for that initial piece of information, and we'll come back in a moment to you. But next we'll hear from Margot Busco-Briggs, Senior Forestry Officer at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Margot, in 2022, FAO published the State of the World's Forest Report, which brings the latest data, trends, and pathways for forest conservation and management. Could you please share the key global trends and recommendations from the report that are critical for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework?
Thanks, Miki, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants, and thanks to the CBD Secretariat for inviting us to this important event, and happy International Day of Forest to all. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today and celebrate this International Day of Forest, but also to celebrate the 10 years anniversary of the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative. And I believe restoration is one of the key topics, that comes across both panels. And since I'm the last speaker here, I think, I'll try to also reflect on this in particular. We've heard a lot of many interesting case studies today and a lot of inspiring new ideas, like, for example, from Brazil. But let me zoom out a little bit, and bring maybe, a slightly different perspective, from our side. For a healthy planet, trees are vital, forests are vital. They are largest terrestrial carbon pool, and they are largest terrestrial reservoir of biodiversity. And we all depend on forests for air, water, food security, for energy, and also for the renewable materials, such as wood. But they continue to shrink, and biodiversity is being lost. And I think it was mentioned by one of the speakers earlier today, already on some data points. Despite some progress in some countries, and congratulations to Brazil for impressive achievements, I think, in 2022, but in many parts of the world, forests are still being lost. For example, we do have data that 10 million hectares is lost annually, and that is due to deforestation. About 35 million hectares is damaged by insects, pests, and diseases. Approximately 70 million hectares is affected by fires. I mean, these are data that come from FAO report, a Global Forest Resources Assessment report. There is still a problem, and there are many challenges. But one of the key reasons, which is also known to all, I think, is that people who manage forests do not get enough benefits to protect them, to maintain them, and to grow them. And I think, therefore, ensuring the recognition of the stewardship and empowerment of local communities, indigenous peoples, small-scale producers, family farmers, women and youth must be placed in the heart of our future work. And I think this will be my first takeaway message from this discussion today. I also think it resonates with all the questions and some comments which I've been looking in the chat box. Moving on, and secondly, if we use forests and trees more wisely, they can provide powerful solutions. And we all talked about these solutions today as well. Storing carbon can, and cost effectively removing greenhouse gases, can account for around 20% of the additional mitigations needed by 2030. We can maintain and increase even biodiversity to safeguard environment and the planet in some specific ecosystems through restoration activities or other activities. Forests can provide to create jobs and income, especially in rural areas where poverty is more widely spread. And I think to achieve that, what we do in FAO and what FAO is advocating for is the three forest-based solution pathways. One, stop deforestation. 2, put trees back, restore. Planting trees and restoring natural ecosystem and productive capacities can contribute not only to protecting biodiversity, but also to create a variety of socioeconomic benefits. And 3, use forests and trees better in a sustainable way. They are a renewable source. They are a sustainable source of high-value materials and services, but they need to be used sustainably and wisely. In almost any given local context, this tree solution pathway can and needs to be implemented jointly in a right and a balanced way. And this is the way forward that FAO is proposing in the States of World Forest report, which you mentioned, Mikey, which was published in 2022. The report is available on FAO website. You can check it. You can find a lot of more data and details on the tree solution pathways and also the interrelated way how we propose them to be implemented. The report is available in 6 UN languages. And to summarize, I think I'd like to say that the tree forest interrelated solution pathways protect, restore, sustainably use, can and should support the advancement of the implementation of the GBF. And of course, one can say, what about finance? And we just talked about finance, and Dara presented an incredible innovative idea on the Forest Forever Fund, also thinking about the long-term solutions. Indeed, this is a core issue for conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of biodiversity. And I want to highlight the fact that many of the people that determine the fate of the forest, those on the frontiers, they don't see enough of benefits to protect. They don't see enough of the funding. They don't see enough benefits to keep and grow the forest. Because a farmer that needs income to feed family or finance better prospects for his or her children will likely make a choice weighing costs, risks, and benefits. Hence, those investments in forest pathways would need to increase by 4 by 2050. And all the options available must be considered and put forward. And let me go back to one of the points I mentioned at the beginning of this intervention. Smallholders, local communities, indigenous peoples are crucial for scaling up the implementation of the forest pathways. They own and manage at least 4.5 billion hectares of forest and farmlands worldwide. They are custodians of much of the world's remaining intact forests and also a great share of the forest carbon stock. But also 67% of deforestation globally is happening in the context of poverty, lack of food, and poor livelihoods, according to the recent FAO study, and I can put in the chat box the links to those studies for those who are interested. Hence, there is really a need to dramatically increase support to smallholders for achieving sustainability of food and better livelihood in order to protect forest biodiversity. Finally, referring to the theme of the idea of this year, which is forest and innovations, science, technology, and innovations is at the core of our strategic framework and our mandate. And we've been working very closely with the CBD Secretariat and other partners on advancing monitoring of Target 2 using technologies, innovations, and cutting-edge solutions. And I wish also to share with the participants that today in Rome, in FIO, we are launching the grant application jointly developed by FIO and Google, which is an open source mobile application in the open forest suite to empower indigenous peoples and smallholders in monitoring their actions on the ground. I hope this also responds to some of the questions in the chat box on how we can involve people. I think this open source tools can provide not all the solutions, but can be a tool that can certainly advance some actions. This specific application is tailored to accelerate local actions on restoration, to register local forestry and agriculture activities, and to register demarcating customary lands, which are also, I think, essential variables for the implementations of the GBF. So I think in conclusions, I want to just mention that we're looking forward to continue our collaboration with the CBD Secretariat, the parties, and all the partners, and we're looking forward to welcoming you to the 9th World Forest Week 2024, which we will hold in FIO in Rome in July from 22nd to the 26th, under the theme Accelerating Forest Innovation. So innovation will stay with us, I think, not only just for today, but also for a much longer period of time. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Margot, and also for addressing some of the questions that are coming up in the Q&A. So that's fantastic. we will go to some broader questions. I would like to just follow up with Kamal and then also add a question from one of the participants. So Kamal, you've shared quite a lot of experience from Nepal, and we're hoping that you could elaborate a little on how ensuring gender equality and social inclusion will support meeting the biodiversity goals regarding forests. But also, there's quite a number of questions in the Q&A around how can the strong role of IPLC play in forest ecosystem restoration, again, to support the Global Biodiversity Framework, and also around involving Indigenous peoples and local communities, how they can be involved in co-design and collaboration. So when you're discussing around the role and why it matters for reaching the biodiversity targets, you could add a little bit more on how this can be brought forward more actively. Kamal, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I also see the very interesting question in the chat box. I will try to cover that question. For the restoration, we must focusing on the customary and biocultural practices based on the system of the indigenous science and technology, and also the knowledge base. In these regards, we are very keen to looking for our inclusion and meaningful participation in NBSAP revision to contribute the restoration AJA, Kunming-Montreal and its targets. That is our further looking for sightings. For this restoration that I mentioned in the Mundum biocultural restoration landscape approach, is happening in the degraded lands and farmland to protect the more forest and bring back in natural ways of focusing more indigenous forest species and indigenous food system in agriculture and in indigenous agroforestry system. That is links for our language, our traditional knowledge, that's our identity. We are contributing for the biodiversity conservation and restoration approaches. It is closely linked with the KMGV. So it is very important for this reflect in NBSAP revision. So that means we are very happily, very respectful, very keen to looking for our engagement in NBSAP process in regional level, in global level, in national levels. That help us for the secure our the rights and custodiancy. It is the spirit and objective of the convention. I think I can address some of the question in queries. If not, then I will have another opportunity to express. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And a question now to Garo, if you could just explain, there's been some other related questions, I think, in the chat, but to start off with, if you could explain if and how biodiversity will be safeguarded in the fund's activities, and what are the next milestones for the Tropical Forest Forever Fund? There's a lot of F's in there.
Yes, and there is facility, one more F. Look, the activity activity is to pay for performance. So we are not financing projects. So safeguard itself is not like the safeguards when we have a GEF project or any other one. What we need to do is that the criteria that we use for the performance to be considered good, the eligibility criteria for the countries to participate and be allowed to receive per hectare of forest, have to be good enough to ensure that the integrity of the forest. And this is why we want to discount degraded forest. So it's a surrogate for biodiversity, saying if we don't count degraded forest and we only count standing forest plus restored forest, that should be good enough for biodiversity. But it's not complete. Maybe other people have the better ways of doing this. If we have suggestions of how to do, thinking that has to be applied to 80 countries, and we are proposing something that doesn't require baselines and all these other things, because if we need, 10 PhD per hectare every time we want to do an assessment in order to pay, the cost of it will be overwhelmed, especially if we look at the number of countries out there. But it's an important issue, and we will try to address technically. The other question was about distribution of funds, you say?
The other question was around the milestones, the next milestones.
The milestones is that we're now having 2 tracks. We're starting to discuss with some NGO, with some academia on how to flesh it out, the environmental part, and also how to flesh it out, the financial part. We just had a meeting with pension funds and other funds here in Brazil, internationally, where they said, well, this makes sense, we could buy the bond, but then you need a lot of details. You need a guarantee credit line. You need other things to make this work and keep the risk of the investment low. Those are things that we are doing 2 parallel tracks. We're also setting up a small consultative group with countries, both sides, countries that can participate on investment or that have sovereign funds can participate in investment, and countries that could be eligible for this, so that we can have as a sounding board, because sometimes technical people, like us, write things and then politically doesn't make any sense or is not applicable, etc. Our goal is to start having this mechanism test availability and see it works by the end of this year. Hopefully we can come up with, make some kind of announcement on CBD of a more fleshed out mechanism with more details on it by the CBD this year, and then start raising the funds next year, so that by COP30, which is going to be in Brazil, we will be able to announce that the fund will be operational. Those are the 2 major milestones. Let's put it this way. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And another question to Margot, I'm going to take one from the participants. There was a question around, and this relates on this idea of a fund or a facility to support where there's already success. But in which countries is forest restoration happening at a faster rate than deforestation, illegal logging? Putting you on the spot.
You're putting me on the spot. I don't think I have this kind of data at the moment. I don't even think that the CBD Secretariat has this kind of data per country. I'm not even sure this data globally exists. So that's maybe something to look at in the future. But maybe, I could refer to some other questions which were actually, appearing a lot in the discussion today. And those were related really, on how to make sure that, we involve local communities, indigenous people, smallholders, in all the actions related to forest biodiversity. And I think, just to answer on the question of how, a couple of examples, of what we do. And I was recently, in the Asia Pacific region, where we actually did the discussion at the regional level on forest education. And one of the way on the how is really to revitalize forest education already from the primary schools. Another way is really, to do the co-design of all the projects, ensure the participatory processes. Another one is really to revitalize the traditional knowledge and the use of the traditional knowledge. We are working a lot, in FIO with Latin America and also with Africa on many of the programs that relate to that. Forest fields, farm schools, another interesting concept and another work that is being done by FIO with many partners across many countries, a lot in Africa. Forest and farm facility, which we also operate, that supports creating cooperatives, and access to markets, but also access, to the policy debates and to the debates such as this one. So those voices are heard in the design and discussion on policies. But you have touched also a very important point, and maybe I can quickly reflect on this if you allow me, if I have 1 more minute. I know you're running out of time.
1 more minute is fine.
1 more minute. Just, on the issue of the restoration, sustainable use, conservation, what I've been advocating, through my first intervention, but also thinking a little bit, about the sustainable use and at the trends which Jamal, you asked me to talk about. Maybe I can quote another recent FIO study, which is the Forest Sector Outlook Study report up to 2050. And according to this report, it is estimated that the global consumption of primary processed wood products will increase by 37%. Now, the question is where this wood should come from. And I think, when we at the same time talking a lot about the efforts on restoration and different restoration opportunities, but also, on the enormous amount, of land that is available. I think there is a legitimate need for a discussion on how to utilize this land that may be needed, for the production, but at the same time, how do we ensure that the conservation and restoration of ecosystems for all the functions is secured? The same report also suggests that at least 33 million hectares of additional commercial plantations could be sufficient to meet this need. But the question is where this should come from, how they should be selected, where they should be located. It's not an answer, it's many questions. It's maybe for another discussion, but I think it's relevant to also bring it up to discuss when we're talking restoration. Thank you, and over maybe to other panelists who wants to reflect on this or other points. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Margot. And I would just like to take a moment to ask panelists if there are questions that have come up in the Q&A in the chat that we haven't had time to respond to. Please write something into the chat and put it out there. These questions will also obviously come into the CBD and FAIRY's reflections on looking forward. I would also like to ask all of the participants online if they can, particularly the parties, if they can share their ideas and strategies for addressing forest biodiversity issues within the framework's implementation. So we want to understand the challenges and explore, but also really to explore the potential collaborative solutions. So please, if everyone could take a moment and put those ideas into the Q&A or the chat if they can access it, and then those ideas can be brought together at the end of the webinar, because as with all webinars full of great conversation and ideas, we are running out of time. Jamal, shall I pass over to you, or can I take one more question to one of the panelists?
I think we can still have a minute or two for the questions.
Okay, wonderful. So we've had a number of questions responded on the role of local communities. I think we've addressed some of these ideas of where does the supply side come from at the same time as looking at restoration. We had a question on maybe to Adams or to Magda around how we integrate emerging technologies such as GIS and AI for biodiversity management, if one of the panelists would like to respond to that question. Wonderful, yeah. Magda, please. Magda, and then I'll come to you, Adams.
Okay, great. I mean, it's a very exciting time for biodiversity, and technology can be really very, very interesting and useful and capitalize on all the slow science we've been doing all these years. I expect that it will be really game changing. You know, a lot of international projects are now ongoing on gathering biodiversity, either with DNA barcoding or with knowing the birds from the sound, etc. And all of this knowledge will benefit from this AI technology to to prepare for the future and see how biodiversity will evolve in each case. So the wealth of data we are gathering will benefit from this AI technology.
Wonderful, thank you. Adams, if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I think this is really good because as a forester who is 42 years of experience, when I first started, all assessment, I had to be in the forest with elements, and it will take a year or so to be able to get information. Now you have remote sensing and all of this technology. You can get information in real time to make really good decisions and to be able to assess forests and changes that are happening in forests and ecosystems is really, really great. But we still have challenges in terms of some really peculiar activities and impact on forests that we're not able to make the link and connection. So there's still need for further studies. But yeah, technology is really important. It is really helpful in the 21st century forest management systems. That is really good, and information system is really good, and that we're able to make forests really a global approach in terms of exchanging information, South-South cooperation, especially among island states where you have these kind of activities. In fact, when we're talking about forest restoration and ecosystem services, I think we need to also revise the definition of forests from the conventional approach of forest for timber management. Now we have forest for ecosystem services, and the conventional definition does not meet that needs, and it requires for us to be able to change it as well. So I just wanted to add that and appreciate the introduction of technology, especially remote sensing. I would be able to sit in my desk or with a device in my hands and be able to get real-time information. That is fantastic.
Thank you, Adams. And I think my own organization, which is the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry, is also really excited about the potential of some of these tools and about aligning and supporting MBSAPs within many of the countries we work in, and how we bring this monitoring data both into planning and implementation support, as well as feeding back the results. And we have come very close to the end of time. There's amazing other comments, questions coming through the chat. I really encourage participants to please keep putting your ideas on successes, opportunities into the chat so that these can be brought together at the end. And I'd like to hand over to Jamal to give some closing messages, and also we'll have a short video again to close us out. Jamal, over to you.
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank all the panelists, the speakers for today's webinar. It was really interesting to hear the stories from all over the world on the different mechanisms and the different perspectives and views on the forest. And I think this is really the most important part, since the takeaway message that the forest is such a multidimensional resource. We need forests, and what we heard today, we need forests because it's, for some countries, it's a last refuge of genetic resources. We need forests because it's a cultural, traditional, and spiritual refuge also for people, and especially for indigenous people and local communities, smallholders. We need forests also to provide us with ecosystem services, which also would include also the production of forest-based products. So that's the reality. So how to come and really converge and reconcile those different demands, the growing demands in the forest, and especially when the climate change is really putting us in a very pressing situation with the remaining forest resource, forest areas. That's when the forest finance, and especially the innovative forest finance mechanism, which was presented today, is also important, especially trying to secure a more sustainable and long-term impact of those financing. I also would like to highlight the importance that all forest matters. We heard that the forest in the Mediterranean region, the tropical forest, but also more for dryland forests and boreal forests are all important because it's so intrinsically linked and interconnected to so many different ecosystems. And I would like to maybe conclude by reflecting on one of the questions which I really liked in the Q&A is how can we make sure that the target 8 on minimizing the impact of the climate change and the target 18 on promoting positive and reducing negative incentives could work together. And this question was posed in the context of the European context and the potential wood-based bioenergy impact on the forest degradation. I think what is important, since the global biodiversity framework, you know how hard was the negotiation of this framework. It really opens up a lot of opportunities for the government, for business, and for all of the stakeholders. So I really would like to invite the parties, the stakeholders, the technical partners to utilize this framework to promote those topics. So for the parties, of course, it's the negotiation process. So we will see each other on the 26th meeting of SABSTA in May this year. Maybe for some of the partners on the call, we see each other on the UN Forum on Forests 19 meeting, also in May this year. And of course, we would like to invite you all and see you all in the COP16 in October this year, where those linkages of highlighting the importance of the forest and negotiations would be very important for us. So I would like to thank Mickey Yu for very nice moderation of this event. And before we close the webinar, if we could again screen and watch the achievement of the forest ecosystem restoration for the last 10 years. And we really hope and we believe that the ferry would be fit for purpose to achieve and support the achievement of the global biodiversity framework. Thank you. So thank you very much again, also to colleagues in the CBD Secretariat for your active support during this for this webinar. Thank you again, and have a nice day. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.